I'm by the Kalmius River. This is one of the most beautiful parts in Donetsk city. Here you can see families walking, you will see joggers, people riding bikes. You will almost forget you're in a war zone. And I say almost, just before we started filming, just from this direction to my right, we heard the all too familiar sound of what I believe was air defences. It could have been shelling. And this is everyday life here. For the people of Donetsk city. It has been for the last 9 years now. This morning, very sadly, 2 people were killed in the Kirovsky district of Donetsk. This is to the west of the city centre. Now, according to officials, there were 4 artillery shells, 155 millimeters. So this means that they were Western supplied, that crashed through an apartment building, causing the ceiling to collapse. They were buried under the rubble. The man died instantly. The woman was taken to hospital, but she died from her injuries. So it's another dark day. But people often ask questions, and I think I may be able to answer some of them. One of them is, how do you know that these were Western supplied weapons? Well, one of the ways we do that is by looking at the fragments of the missile or the artillery shell or whatever it is that struck a building, and they're usually either the Western supplied or Grad missiles that have caused the damage and the deaths. And so that's one way that we can tell that it was a Ukrainian fired missile. Also the direction that the artillery shell has been fired from, that's another way we can identify it. So these areas, Kirovsky for example, is, if you go further west, then you'll come to some of the Ukrainian held positions, and this is where they launch daily attacks and daily shelling into the civilian areas. Now, I just want to address something really. This is just weeks after the TUC passed motion C21, which I have to say is one of the most reactionary motions that we've seen in modern trade union history, and it saw all of the big trade unions, GMB, Unite, Unison, ASLEF and others lining up essentially behind their own ruling class and voting in favour of increasing material aid to Ukraine. And this means the very weapons, the very artillery shells, the very missiles that are being fired into civilian areas on a daily basis. It was just maybe a week ago that me and my crew attended the scene of a cluster munition attack in which an elderly woman was wounded, badly wounded, and taken to hospital. Now, after that shelling, we were there the next morning, and there were emergency response teams, and they were scouring green areas like this one here, looking for the unexploded bomblets that are left behind, often for decades, by these cluster munitions that we've seen in other countries where they've been used, like Laos, for example, in Southeast Asia. Now, this represents obviously a very big threat to the civilian population of Donetsk. This is exactly what people were warning of. The cluster munitions, again, are being used. They're now a familiar sound. We hear it pretty much every day. We can hear that, and they're blast very, very close together. So you can tell that it's a cluster munition that has been used. I think maybe just days after the announcement that the US was supplying these munitions, a journalist was killed in the Zaporozhye region. But here in Donetsk city, the Economic and Technical University of Donetsk was pretty much destroyed in a cluster munition attack. There was a huge blaze. Firefighters worked throughout the night, and they were still there the next morning. And we saw the extent of the damage with the collapsed ceiling and the flooding of the floor. So people are being killed every single day because of these cluster munitions and because of the Ukrainian supplied weapons. Just something else I wanted to touch on. Again, I've seen that in Britain, the former prisoners of war, Sean Pinner, Aidan Aslin, have been doing the rounds of the television stations. I think Aslin was out at the United Nations and the International Committee for the Red Cross. Very recently, Pinner was on BBC. He's appearing on Piers Morgan. Both of them have book deals. Now, they've been speaking, and Pinner in particular was talking about a genocide of Ukrainians. Now, this is simply absurd, I have to say, because even the United Nations disagrees with him on that. They said that there's not enough evidence that there was a genocide of Ukrainians. But here in Donetsk, we can safely say that that is exactly what awaits the people here if the Ukrainian counter-offensive is successful. Now the Russians have dug in with a defensive line. Fortunately, the Ukrainian counter-offensive is fading. They keep pumping more and more of these so-called game changers. The Abrams tank is one of these. This is the latest that is apparently, according to Zelensky, has now arrived in Ukraine, and this is supposed to be tipping the balance in favour of Ukraine. I don't think it will, actually. You saw Lloyd Austin, the US Defence Secretary, started to say, well, please don't hunt them down, play by the rules of the game. Whatever that meant, I don't know, but it kind of, I guess, reflected a fear that they would see this tank go up in flames in the same way as the Leopard and the Challenger 2, the British tank, which until recently, very recently, the last few weeks, claimed that it had never seen a defeat on the battlefield. Well, now that's not the case. So, of course, these are prime targets, unsurprisingly, for the Russian armed forces. Of course, they're going to want to destroy these machines, and unsurprisingly as well, the Ukrainians are very reluctant to get inside them for that very reason, because they've seen that, you know, the Leopards and the Challengers and the Bradley fighting vehicles and all these other pieces of military hardware going up in smoke. But we filmed maybe a few weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, we filmed at the Azovstal steel plant. We also filmed at the Mariupol Drama Theatre, which is the site of some controversy, I have to say, because it was here that even the Western media can't agree on what happened, and the Western human rights organisations, they have, the Washington Post initially said no people died, then Amnesty International reported 12, and the Associated Press as high as 600. But we spoke to the people there. That's currently being reconstructed and rebuilt at the moment. We spoke to people that were held hostage there by Azov fighters, and they told a very different story from the narrative played out by the West, as did the people of Mariupol, and I was actually quite shocked. We spoke to, I guess, maybe 10 people in a park. There's a new park at the back of the Mariupol Drama Theatre. These were just people that we walked up to randomly. I mean, we didn't select them. We just spoke to people that were sitting on benches walking through the park. And I would say 80% of those people, maybe 8 out of 10 of them, said that the Azov were terrorists. They were a terrorist organisation. They were very clear on what they thought should happen to them. This is in the context of the ongoing trials taking place in Rostov. The first sentences have been handed down, but they said, all of them, and these are, you know, sort of quite respectable people with families, and they were saying that Azov, those people should be executed. I was really quite shocked, and they didn't have a kind word to say about the mercenaries either, the people that were holed up in the Azovstal steel plant. Again, this is a myth that has been created by the West, the heroes of Mariupol, or, you know, the defenders of, the heroes of Azovstal, the defenders of Mariupol, is a myth created by the West, really, again, to whitewash what really happened there. And these were largely Nazis, from the neo-Nazis, I should say, from the Azov battalion, and they were there with the British mercenaries were holed up there. But again, they had held people from Mariupol hostage in that basement, and they'd mined the basement as well. So they aren't quite the heroes that they're being made out to be. There's plenty more to reflect on, and this is just really the first, I guess, in a series of these kind of walks and talks. We'll be reporting from the scene and doing some other things, but I think there's a very clear message, really, is that those that are pursuing this Russian troops outline, what it means for the people here. So we heard the air defences earlier, and the air defences are, last night, for example, I heard them all throughout the night, and I dread to think what would happen if the air defences weren't here. If the air defences went away, the death toll would be much, much higher. So the people of Donbass certainly don't support Resolution C-21. They do support Russian troops being here to defend them from a potential genocide.